Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to those joining us on Zoom. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Today, we are excited to have with us Christopher Setterlund, a renowned author and historian of various things pertaining to Cape Cod and beyond. Chris actually started here with writing and presenting his book at the Osterville Village Library. We are excited to have him back. We have had him several times, Lady of the Dunes being a very exciting talk that we had last year. And this year is the how many year anniversary?
50th this month.
50th year anniversary this month of the Lady of the Dunes. So today we are going to be talking about Cape Cod Nights, historic bars, clubs, and drinks. So without further ado, here is Christopher Setterlund.
Thank you all so much for coming out on this beautiful day. So yes, my very first author event I ever did was downstairs in February 2014 for my first book. So this year, Cape Cod Nights, this was my fifth book that I put out. This was in 2019. I am resurrecting it by popular demand from Amy. I said, of course. And the book itself chronicles some of the beloved and most infamous night spots on Cape Cod. For me, I am a 12th generation Cape Codder through the Doan family. So you can see Deacon John Doan was my ninth great grandfather. He helped to settle the town of Eastham. And so if you go into the National Seashore, there's the Doan Homestead, Doan Rock, the Cove Burying Ground on Route 6 in Eastham. Deacon John Doan is buried somewhere in there. They said it's close enough to that, so they put a big monument in the middle. Since my first event, though, here at Osterville Village Library, I'm now an author of 9 books dealing with Cape Cod and the islands. And you can see there are travel books, history books, and then kind of a mishmash. Lady of the Dunes, the true crime book, a second version of my Cape Cod travel guide, which was the first book I put out, and a photography book that I got kind of by luck. But I completed a trilogy of Cape Cod books that were basically where you went to eat, where you went to drink, and then where you went to sleep off what you did to your body. And that was these 3 in the trilogy. And so let's reminisce about some of those wild nights on Cape Cod. They're likely hard to remember. I found it funny that for the restaurants book, I had no shortage of stories, of photos, inside, outside. For this book, it was a lot different. I got a lot of, well, my memories are hazy at best and no photos. So a lot of what you'll see for photos here in this presentation are from the Kings of Cape Cod. It's a documentary Dan McCarthy did several years ago about the golden age of Cape Cod nightlife. So they've got a website, they've got a documentary, and they helped me with this book. So I wanted to make sure I gave them credit for this picture. It's like the Mill Hill Club here. So before the turn of the 20th century, nightlife consisted of mainly these places. So we're talking taverns and saloons, like on the left. And they were noisy, lively, smoky, dimly lit, but they had a rustic charm. And people would gather there to drink, socialize, relax. They drank whiskey and beer, played billiards and cards. On the right, an example of a music hall. They were more vibrant venues, live music, comedy, dance, vaudeville acts, sometimes theatrical performances. And the atmosphere was energetic. It was a cultural mixing pot that showcased a variety of musical styles, performances from various cultures, wide range of acts, local talent, international stars. And there were social clubs. Those were exclusive, elegant, catered toward the upper class, more specifically, lawyers, businessmen, artists. And so in early days like that on Cape Cod, there were a few examples of these types of clubs. So the Atlantic House, also known as the A House, is actually still around to this day, but it first was established in 1798, and it was Peace's Tavern, established by Daniel Peace. It became the Atlantic House in 1871 under Frank Potter Smith, evolving it from a tavern into a renowned hotel and entertainment venue. It hosted significant figures in music and artistry throughout the years, like poet Eugene O'Neill, jazz legends Miles Davis, Ella Fitzgerald. And over the years, the A House adapted to the cultural shifts, especially in the 70s, to embrace Provincetown's growing gay community with dedicated spaces like the Macho Room, the Dance Club, and it keeps inventing itself to this day. But then a place on the right, the Higgins Tavern, that was established in 1829 by Simeon Higgins, and he was a ship captain. He converted his home, which you can see here, to a tavern, hotel, and it was a general store. It was a post office. The tavern gained fame when Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson stayed there. And after Higgins died in 1861, the tavern changed hands. It was introduction of the railroad affected its business. In the 20s, it was repurposed as a hardware store before becoming the Aquanon Club, which was also a tavern, in 1933 after Prohibition ended. Interestingly, the majority of this building was destroyed by fire, but the Old Mill Tavern, which is on Route 6A in Orleans, was built from the remains of this original building. So if you ever go by there, you pass by it. Usually you see it at the last second. And this building is kind of in the center. It's a grayish blue, and around it is a motel. It's an interesting little piece of history. On January 17th, 1920, Prohibition went into effect, and this made alcohol illegal to produce and sell. And I mean, you could abide by it, but you could try to visit a speakeasy as well. That might not end well. So this here, the Casa Madrid, is one of the legendary Cape Cod speakeasies. It was in South Yarmouth, steps away from what it's known as Bass River Beach, but it's more commonly known as Smuggler's Beach. And there's no kind of ambiguity with what they were smuggling. Casa Madrid was built in 1933, and it was a Spanish-style stucco building in a regular residential neighborhood. It stuck out like a sore thumb. It was created by local realtor Alex Finn and his partner Oscar Skinner, and it was intended to be a high-class dinner and dancing establishment associated with the Yarmouth Beach Club. Now, it opened June 30th, 1933, and was a big success. But 6 weeks later, as you can see by this article on the side, it was raided by law enforcement because word quickly got out that it was a speakeasy. So, August 13th, 1933, 35 law enforcement officers raided the Casa Madrid, and they found patrons drinking, gambling. It resulted in arrests, the seizure of liquor, gambling equipment. And then there was a second raid. And despite the raid and all this ongoing trouble, they stayed open through their first season. And after Prohibition's repeal in late 1933, Casa Madrid, they wouldn't give it a liquor license because the town was basically like, we remember what you did. So they kind of made them work for it. Eventually, they got a liquor license. They were a restaurant through the 1960s of varying success. And it struggled in 1960. I mean, in 1969, it finally shut down. This building itself stood until April of this year. Now, what ended up happening was it was converted into a musical museum, a teen crisis center. What they did was they built around, so those two edges that are definitely the very Spanish style, those were renovated, so you couldn't quite tell that it used to be the old Casa Madrid. It's like if you grew up on Cape Cod, you knew what it was, but if you didn't, it looked just like any other building. During Prohibition,
Christopher, yeah, can I ask a question or two during it, or I'm sorry, or no, should we not?
I'd rather you.
I was just curious, do you have anything on Joe's Twin Villa, the local place here? Do you get to that?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
So during Prohibition, it was smarter, it was safer to drive to nearby dancing and entertainment complexes. Both of these places were in Buzzards Bay. Bornhurst on the Canal was established in 1920 by Walter Burroughs, and it became a hotspot for music, dancing, social gatherings. It had an appealing interior, a large dance floor, and it had occasional setbacks like power outages, but that didn't matter much. It hosted dances, motion picture screenings, basketball games, boxing matches, because during Prohibition, you had to find other ways of entertainment. And that's where places like this became popular for that. They were popular for Sunday clam bakes. They had prominent jazz musicians like Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway come and play there. Unfortunately, it's a sad end for Bornhurst because financial difficulties and two fires in 1933 led to the destruction of the building in the weeks before Prohibition was repealed. So it never got to see what could have been. The Blue Moon Dancing Pavilion, also in Buzzards Bay, that was created in 1931 by George Hubbard Blakesley. He was a professor at Clark University. It was on the north side of the canal, and it was open during 4th of July week in 1931. And it was popular for an innovative mix of indoor and outdoor spaces, neon lit dance floor, wax coated dance floor, an outdoor garden. You can see in the picture, they were all outside hanging out and enjoying it. That thrived in the initial years during Prohibition with live orchestra, colorful lights. They had midnight frolics, which started just after midnight to avoid the Sunday alcohol restrictions after Prohibition ended. So they would start at 12:01 a.m. on Monday, despite being a Sunday frolic. Eventually, Philip Lowe took it over in 1939. He would go on to establish the Cod Drive-In in Falmouth. In 1957, Alex Byron acquired it, and he planned to create an outdoor summer theater, but it didn't last. And eventually it became a restaurant in Buzzards Bay known as Byron's Landing, which was open until 1986. But then Prohibition was repealed, and soon nightlife began to take off on Cape Cod. So we're looking at places like the Panama Club on the left, where that was a legendary influential jazz club in Hyannis, opened in 1941 by Antonio Caggiano and his son Reynold. It became a popular spot for young people. It attracted crowds with the swing music, the vibrant atmosphere. It had red and white velvet. Panama Club was the first major Cape Cod nightlife area as you would know it today. And it gained more popularity after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 as it became a communal escape during World War II. It was the launching pad for Marie Marcus, who was Cape Cod's first lady of jazz. She first performed there in 1943. And it was always packed. Live radio broadcasts from there, WOCB, which is now WXTK. They were the first FM Cape Cod station. And throughout the 40s, it was a bustling hub. Celebrities, soldiers, locals gathered there. It was where John F. Kennedy first made his political ambitions known in 1944. In the 50s, the club changed ownership and it faced competition because once they established kind of a blueprint for Cape Cod nightlife, others like the Catalina Club came along, and in the late 50s, it closed. It was demolished in 1972. If you were to go down Main Street, Hyannis, you get to a set of lights. There used to be Guido Murphy's that we may see in a little while, but then there's a parking lot right after that's a Dunkin' Donuts. That empty parking lot is where the Panama Club once stood. In the middle on the bottom there, Casino by the Sea, that was in Falmouth Heights, first opened in 1901. And initially it was managed by a man named Charles Hobson, and it had cottage club, post office, barber shop, a general store. It was destroyed by a fire, rebuilt. It went through various ownership changes until 1939 when Harry Hobson took it over. This was where the casino bar came in, managed by a man named Joe Moran, who he was a legend of Cape Cod nightlife in the years after World War II. He was the painting bartender. So he would paint caricatures of some of the people that came in. And the casino bar got national attention when Joe Moran was featured in Click magazine in 1943. And so it was kind of grew. There would be hundreds, if not thousands of people at this bar is as late as the 1980s. And it became Casino by the Sea. In 2000, it was sold and demolished. It is currently the Wharf Falmouth is the name of the restaurant that stands on that spot. Now, the other spot there, Mill Hill Club, we'll get back to that in a minute. I can't gloss over that. But the 1940s and 50s, as I mentioned with the Panama Club, was a time where jazz, swing, other types of music meant as much as the drinks accompanying it. So, for example, Storyville. This was a spot in Harwich. It had a very brief but very impactful run. It opened in 1957. A man named George Ween, who started the Newport Jazz and Folk Festival, he had started Storyville in Boston, and he saw this wooded area in Harwich as a place for this new jazz hotspot. He purchased the former Robin Hood Inn, and that was an establishment with a storied past of its own to the Prohibition era, and he transformed it into Storyville. Storyville opened July 4th, 1957, with a performance by Louis Armstrong. So it set the bar high. They had, in their opening season, Dave Brubeck, Errol Garner, and initially, Storyville only served drinks, but they started serving food. That was short-lived. It turned out to be more of a pain than it was worth. Now, setting the bar that high with Louis Armstrong doesn't come cheap. They attracted other major stars like Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan. You've got to pay these people. They're not going to come down for nothing. And it was 10-week seasons. So these are where the problems started to come with Storyville. By 1959, the high cost of attracting top-tier talent, combined with limited profit margins, started to strain their resources. 1960, the quality of the act started to decline because they couldn't afford to bring these people in anymore. The club's final season was 1961, and they still brought in Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, but dwindling ticket sales sealed its fate. Now, Storyville itself closed after the 1961 season. The building that was there became a place called the Red Garter, that later became a place called Your Father's Mustache. And it burned down in the late 60s, but Your Father's Mustache, you may hear a little bit more about in a bit. Now, what followed the Jazz Age would later be known as the Golden Age of Cape Cod nightlife. This would be probably what most of you would remember. It's roughly a time period from 1965 to 1985. And it included places like the Brothers Four in Falmouth. George Robot and his brothers bought and transformed the struggling Terrace Gables Hotel into the Brothers Four. It was claimed to be Cape Cod's largest entertainment complex. It's also known for bartender Tommy Leonard, who was an avid runner. He initiated the Falmouth Road Race, which started at the Captain Kidd restaurant in Woods Hole and ended at Brothers Four. It still ends where Brothers Four was, but it was the British Beer Company up until a few years ago. But it became famous for being 3 clubs under one roof, events like Beat the Clock happy hours, giant pool parties, various contests, drawing crowds of hundreds, even thousands to this area along Falmouth Heights. And that was a problem. It faced legal issues with local residents over noise and zoning laws. And there were prolonged court battles that eventually pressured George Robot to merge the clubs into one and focus on the bar's image. But by then, like once you're an enemy kind of the town, it's hard to get past that. And by 1987, Brothers Four had closed and was replaced by condos. This is likely the time period you all remember or don't remember. And this here, like I said, Kings of Cape Cod did a lot to help me out with this book. So you can see this picture is from the Mill Hill Club during the early 1980s. But there were a lot of incredible places that were around then, famous or infamous, depending on your age, I suppose, at the time. So we'll start with Johnny Yee's and the album cover there. Johnny Yee came from China. He began his venture in Massachusetts with the Dragonlight restaurant in Hyannis, which is still open to this day. That was 1963. He opened the Huki Lao in Chicopee in 1965 before opening Johnny Yee's in 1967 on Route 28 in West Yarmouth. And it was Chinese Polynesian cuisine, but it was also nightly entertainment shows with vibrant evening shows of Hawaiian performances, jazz bands like the Count Basie Orchestra, Bobby Rich. In 1970, the album you see there, An Evening at Johnny Yee's, was recorded, featuring Lou Colombo, Dick Johnson, Dave McKenna. These were all people that my grandparents, when I was growing up, my grandfather was a jazz singer and he owned a donut shop in Hyannis, Sullivan's Donuts. And these men here, Lou Colombo, Dick Johnson, Dave McKenna, were just grandpa's friends that would come over. I didn't know till I got much older that they were jazz singers with a lot of talent. But Johnny Yee's continued until 1992 when it was closed down. Johnny Yee moved to Puerto Rico and he's still there. He owns businesses down there. The Johnny Yee's building was repurposed a couple times as a couple of different buffet restaurants. It just got torn down last year. So if you drive past, there's Giardino's Pizza, and there's now an empty lot, which used to be Johnny Yee's, and hopefully something will go in there. To the right of Johnny Yee's, the Compass Lounge, that was initially planned to be an auction house in 1957. And it started as an auction house. It became a restaurant in 1961. And they were known for classic Cape Cod cuisine and singing waitstaff called the Funtastics. It didn't become the Compass Lounge as you would probably think it until 1976. Thomas Murphy took it over and redefined the nightclub. It became a hub for renowned musical acts, the Cars, Davy Jones of the Monkees, the Stompers. It thrived with theme nights, cheap drinks, and it expanded repeatedly to accommodate the larger crowds. They, by the early 80s, boasted the largest dance floor on Cape Cod. But, and you'll see the ending of the Cape Cod, the golden age of Cape Cod nightlife, affects a lot of these places. The increased scrutiny on drunk driving impacted its popularity. In fact, even in 1989, it was repackaged as the Casbar, which was an epic fail. So it went back to the Compass Lounge. But declining revenue led to its closure in 1996 and demolition that made way for CVS, which is currently there. But of course, we've got two of the most famous, infamous places of Cape Cod nightlife, Puffer Bellies, which was a railroad roundhouse right off of Route 28. And it was repurposed into the vibrant entertainment venue by John Morgan, who he's local legend, known for John Morgan's happy hours. And he purchased the roundhouse, transformed it into Puffer Bellies, which initially was a 700-seat restaurant and nightclub. And it became a huge hit. I think I went there in 2000. It was one of those, of all these nightlife places, when I got to be old enough, Puffer Bellies, I think, was the first one I went to. But it quickly became a hit with renowned musical acts, drawing crowds with innovative marketing, advertising on local radio stations. But again, much like the Compass Lounge, changes to liquor laws, drunk driving, it started to lead to a downturn. John Morgan sold it, but eventually he bought it back. In 2015, he finally sold it to the Highline Ferry, which now it's parking for the Highline Ferry. I couldn't talk about Cape Cod nightlife without number one on the list, the Mill Hill Club. When I was putting this book together and I thought of legendary Cape Cod nightlife, the first place I thought of was Mill Hill. In fact, Mill Hill, Compass Lounge, and Puffer Bellies were the first three I thought of, which is why I put them on the same page here. Mill Hill Club actually has a long history. It started in the mid-20s when it was a restaurant called the Old Mill Tavern, owned by Rose Klaus. It evolved into the Mill Hill Club in the late 1940s under Harold Smith. Harold Smith's son, John Braggington Smith, he started Jack's Out Back. So the history of Mill Hill Club is that family. But it gained prominence in Cape Cod's jazz scene in the 50s. It launched the career of trumpeter Lou Colombo. And then under Carmine Vara's ownership in the late 60s, it started to diversify its musical lineup, including Peter, Paul, and Mary, Black Flag, comedians like Dick Doherty. They released a live album in 1979, which, if you can find it on eBay, it's a collector's item. And again, much like the others on this page, it faced challenges with liquor violations, parking issues, fires, noise, and ownership changes started. But Mill Hill Club started to go downhill in the late 90s. Interestingly, they closed in 2008, but in those years leading up to it, they were actually really closed. But there was, I believe, something with either a tax law or something that they had to keep it open for at least 1 hour a week. And I believe it would be something like a Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock. It would be open, despite the building being dilapidated and falling down. And interestingly, it was demolished in 2014, making way for the Mill Hill Residence, which is a retirement home. That opened in 2017. And today, the disco ball from the Mill Hill Club is in the lobby of the Mill Hill Residence, which is a fascinating full circle where people would joke that the ones that went and partied at Mill Hill are now at the retirement home. And there were other things that would get you into these places, drink deals, happy hours, and that kind of impacts why there were so few photos from those times, these drink specials. The Sandy Pond Club, that was originally a hunting lodge transformed by Jack Braggington Smith, who I just mentioned about Mill Hill. It was transformed in 1953 into the Sandy Pond Club, which was next to Sandy Pond in West Yarmouth. And it was known for its unique charm because it was down this dirt road. It was like an oasis away from everything. You would drive down this dirt road and come to the end here, and there would be just an oasis of this building and the pond and these lights. And they had these distinctive traditions like the lefty righty club, themed nights with jazz and rock performances. They hosted musicians like Lou Colombo and Chubby Checker. It was even briefly overseen by John Morgan as the groggery at Sandy Pond. And it thrived in the early 70s as a local hotspot, affordable drinks, the vibrant atmosphere, and it attracted a diverse crowd, locals, firefighters, police. But financial difficulties led to its closure after the 1978 season, and the town of Yarmouth purchased the property and burned down the building in a controlled burn in 1983. So a funny story, this became the Sandy Pond recreation area is still open. You can go there. It's really nice. My mother, who used to go to Sandy Pond Club every now and then, said that when it opened as the recreation area, she didn't really want us kids going swimming in the pond because there used to be parties, broken glass in there. And she said, even though she was sure they had skimmed the bottom to get most of the broken glass out, she wasn't sure if she wanted us taking a chance. The Lincoln Lodge in the middle here, this was in Harwich. Originally, it was built in 1833 for Captain Leonard Robbins, and it underwent various ownership changes before being sold to the Borden family, Derry family, not the axe murderer family. They turned it into a rooming house named the Lincoln Lodge in honor of author Joseph Lincoln. In 1953, Elsie Lufkin purchased the property and transformed it into a popular dining and drinking establishment. They added a motel called the Mary Todd Court, and it gained fame for unique offerings, fondue, themed events like Hawaiian luau's, nut and bolt night, where you'd have to match up a nut and a bolt and, to get people interacting. But the big peak of their popularity came with the creation of their Nantucket sleigh ride drink in the late 1970s. This would draw lines out the door of people that wanted to come in and have this drink. And this increased popularity led to increased noise complaints. Regulatory challenges led to Lufkin selling the lodge, and it changed names and eventually became Widows Walk Condos, which is still there to this day. The other one there, Beachcomber, we'll get to that one as well. But you had asked, so you can see in the bottom here, these icons here of the golden age of Cape Cod's nightlife will be around forever. You're talking about Joe's Twin Villa is right there in the bottom. Interestingly, about Joe's Twin Villa, which was right down the street here, even this picture, which was the only one I could find with the sign, is far after it closed. You can see it's overgrown. It was there for years, just kind of falling apart. Originally, it was a coal storage area during Prohibition, and it was transformed into this lively roadhouse by Joseph Gomes in 1947. It became known for its welcoming atmosphere, embracing Cape Verdean, African-American communities. It gained recognition being in the Traveler's Green Book as a safe gathering place, and soon attracted patrons of all backgrounds. Under Gomes, Joe's Twin Villa introduced innovative themes like Maids Nights on Thursdays, and drew crowds with its inclusive vibe. And it remained a social hub for 6 decades, known for its unique decor, including a mural of the Cape Cod Canal and consistent community-oriented approach. And by the late 70s, J.B. Richardson infused Southern flair into Joe's with blues music, barbecue, food, boxing matches. It welcomed everyone from local residents to celebrities like the Kennedys, sports stars, and fostered that culture of camaraderie. It closed in 2008 due to rising costs and the changing demographics. And you can see it stood for several years after. It just got torn down within the last year. In the top left, the Windjammer. That was in Hyannis, right at the airport rotary. In 1964, Bud McLean teamed up with Stretch Hinckley to create a lounge known as the Windjammer Lounge Club. And it was seasonal, then it was year round, known as much as a restaurant for its French onion soup and prime rib and overstuffed sandwiches. But in the late 60s, it turned into a live entertainment spot with the arrival of Marie Marcus, who she seemed to, every place she went to on Cape Cod, benefited from her talents. Over the years, the upstairs galley maintained a reputation for fine dining, while downstairs, the bar area thrived with pool tables, a vibrant atmosphere. By the 70s, a significant portion of the sales came from alcohol. So as much as they were a restaurant as well, there was no denying they were becoming more of a bar and a night spot. And this was when Peter Feeney and Ed Kennedy took over in 1976. But this here, the indoor smoking ban around the turn of the 21st century, traffic issues from the airport rotary, this led to a decline in business, despite them trying to adapt. They went from the Windjammer to the Weano Grill, but ultimately it closed down. The building was torn down a couple of years ago. They are building, I believe it's a steakhouse, and it's a chain, and I should know that. But that's, if you go by that spot at the airport rotary, there's chain link fence, and I think it has a sign that says coming soon, whatever it is. The Improper Bostonian, that was around for a long time. It was originally a barn on Joseph Baker's property, repurposed into a nightclub known as the Old Barn Club in the 1950s. But harkening back to something I had said earlier, your father's mustache was originally located in Harwich. When fire destroyed that building, your father's mustache moved in here, and that's what it was first. And the owners found a home on the second floor of this building, and they renamed the first floor the Improper Bostonian. Under the management of Charles Buddy Gould, Improper Bostonian quickly became a local institution with lively happy hours, attracting crowds with specialty drinks, discounts. And well into the 1970s, this property was Improper Bostonian and your father's mustache. And they even opened a downstairs in the basement known as Improper 2. That catered to an under 21 crowd. Throughout its history, Improper Bostonian featured a roster of all-stars of local notables: John Morgan, Dick Doherty, Gordy Milne, Jim Plunkett, and more recently, Grammy nominee Highly Suspect. The building itself, Improper, closed due to COVID, so 2020, 2021. It's for sale, I believe, still, but if you drive by, the building is still there. Then another infamous spot, Guido Murphy's at the end of Main Street in Hyannis. It was originally a theater and later a marketplace. It became Guido Murphy's in 1979 and was owned by Frank and Tony Viola from 1981 on. This became a legendary nightlife spot, especially known for the back room. There was an upstairs area known as the Snake Pit, and it featured an outdoor bar, upstairs balcony where people would climb across and jump in and go in without having to pay. But it became hugely popular, which led to a lot of noise complaints, where people said it was kind of like a mini Times Square out there when the place would let out. By the early 90s, complaints from neighbors, legal battles with the town led to them restricting the hours of the business, which really affected how much money they can make. If you're open till 1 a.m., it's different than if you're open to 11 p.m. This place has got a lot of interesting little bits to it. So at first it was rebranded briefly as a Michi's, more of a restaurant. But then what they did was they called it a Michi's. They petitioned the town to, oh, we're a restaurant now. Can we be open till 1 a.m. again? And the town relented. And as soon as they did that, they went back to being Guido Murphy's, which the town did not like. And in 1999, it was renamed Guido Murphy's Cabaret, where they would fly in exotic dancers from the South and basically blacked out the windows to make it more of an adult type club. This led to the loss of its operating license. And by the end of 1999, Guido Murphy's was closed down. It's an amazing story. It's more in depth in the book, but the whole idea of tricking the town into giving them longer hours and bringing in cabaret dancers, it's incredible. It was a wild scene, but there was a cost to that wild scene. You can see, different places, Cape Cod Coliseum, the line to get into the Mill Hill Club. In the middle is Deacon's Perch that was on Route 6A in Yarmouthport. Here, the college party thing, this was from the Main Sheet News college newspaper at Cape Cod Community College. 2-for-1 drink nights for college. All of this came together with Operation Last Call. And you can see the year of 1985. That's the hard demarcation of the end of the golden age of Cape Cod nightlife. It was implemented in 1985 to combat drunk driving, aimed to reduce alcohol-related traffic incidents with increased police presence, sobriety checkpoints, particularly during the late night hours when drunk driving was more common. There was public awareness campaigns, stricter penalties. Interestingly, you can see this article that they had in the local papers, I think Cape Cod Times, Boston Globe, they had these kind of stakeouts. And what they would do is pull people over and say, where did you come from? Where was the last place you got served? And they kind of made a tally of the biggest offenders as far as Operation Last Call went. The number one offender in the state was Compass Lounge. And that's where this article came from. It's incredible. But slowly but surely, those establishments start to close. 1985 is kind of the end of the golden age, but it didn't just stop there. So you look at Guido Murphy's, like I said, 1999, they kind of shot themselves in the foot. Mill Hill Club, 2008. Compass Lounge, 1998, it was CVS. Puffer Bellies, 2016, it's now the parking for the Highline Ferry. And Windjammer was 2005. And like I said, Improper was 2020. But all is not lost. Luckily, some of these places do still exist. Old Colony Tap, right in the middle there, that was opened in 1937. And it's a cherished part of Provincetown's culture and history. It was originally the Colonial Tap during the Great Depression, but quickly changed to its current name. It's next door to the Lobster Pot currently. It's got a unique nautical decor, driftwood covered walls, life preservers, other maritime bric-a-brac on the walls. And it just contributes to its quirky and inviting ambiance. It expanded into the building behind it, opened the Rumpus Room, became a favorite haunt for local writers, poets, fishermen. It's got a legendary status. Almost 100 years it's been open. Chatham Squire, which is the bottom left, that's located at 487 Main Street, Chatham. Also opened in 1937. It was the New York sandwich shop. It became the Chatham Squire in 1969, opened by Ben Lambert, George Payne, and Richard Costello. It was redesigned to resemble an old English inn, captain's chairs, mahogany stained walls. distinctive decor, like license plates all over the walls near the bar. And in 1970, it expanded to include a boathouse lounge. It's still got excellent food and excellent atmosphere. In the early 1980s, they were serving around 25,000 people per season for food. And then I didn't want to skip out on the Beachcomber right there in the middle, where that was originally a life-saving station built in 1897. This place, it's still around, and it'll probably still be around for a long time. The only issue ever with the Beachcomber is parking, due to the parking lot being essentially the bluffs that you can see there. It was a few years ago, a sinkhole opened up there and swallowed a car. So you can park and kind of get shuttled there, which is probably safer. But they have had a lot of big time musical acts there. Weezer, They Might Be Giants. They introduced the Goombay Smash, which is their popular drink. And it's a secret recipe. But interestingly, when this book came out in 2019, I did a segment on the TV show Chronicle, and we interviewed the people from the Beachcomber. And they hadn't seen the book, so they thumbed to the Beachcomber section. At the end of each chapter in this book, I have a drink that would associate with the decade that the specific place was at its peak. And I did the 1980s, and I believe I put Long Island iced tea for Beachcomber. And the owner of the bar said, "Why did you put that and not the Goombay Smash?" And I said, "Well, it's a secret recipe, right?" And he said, "I'd have rather have given you that recipe than have Beachcomber associated with the Long Island iced tea." I was like, "Wow, wish I had known that." But there'll always be memories if you can remember them. These things here, like I said, the Kings of Cape Cod, you can see the logo. I highly recommend the documentary. All this stuff is from their website, their Facebook page, and I won't blast by it so you can see there's loads of stuff. Pufferbelly's designated driver, the one it's sort of covered because that South Mashpee Sipping Society, it's an actual person I borrowed that photo from, so I covered their face. But it was for On the Rocks in Mashpee, which was right at the Mashpee Rotary. It's now like a sand pit across the street from Mashpee Commons. They've now got it blocked off where you can't pull into the parking lot anymore. But there was all this, the Sandy Pond Club, cards, Your Father's Mustache. Dick Doherty, I think he just recently passed away as well. And John Morgan, definitely, he's been having his own health issues. So give a shout out if he is listening. And so thank you for joining me. I knew I wouldn't tell you about the disco ball without showing you. So right in the middle, that is the disco ball from the old Mill Hill Club. And the funny thing is, I worked for a time at the Mayflower Retirement Home, which is attached property to the Mill Hill residence. And within my first week of working there, I went over because I wanted that photo. And the woman that worked the reception desk, she must have gotten a lot of people that wanted to see that. So I walked in and she said, "It's in that room." I had my camera with me. She didn't even ask what it was for. It's in there. But do you have any questions? I'd be glad to try to answer as best I can. None? Well, thank you all for coming. Did I answer your questions about Joe's Twin Villa? Was it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Remember, part of early Cape, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the positive influence of Joe Kennedy during Prohibition of importing liquor from the UK, right? And so that the myth around here is that that he allowed that liquor to be directed to a Cape Verdean club, and there's a contact there, and he would distribute more of the white clubs. And so there was kind of a segregation of who would distribute, but it all came from, he had that liquor license of importing, I think it was a Scotch and gin at the time, from the UK, because there was a lot of distilled there. So that's that kind of local myth, and that's why he was a big supporter of that club and the success of that club.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you dig into some of these places, especially the older ones, going back 50s and before, how they started.
Fascinating one too, that's really local here, is the foxhole. So we have a local veterans club, private club, small club here in Husterville. But that was built prior to World War I as an original bunker, and it was almost a burger joint. And then converts, and it was like it was before Wimpy's. And so it would just be like a 4 or 5 seat little place, because there was no place to get a hot burger anywhere in the village.
It's fascinating how there were a few places that ended up in this book that started as restaurants or doubled as restaurants.
You also gave a lot of credit for those clubs. I would have thought they shut down before that, you know, I mean, I went to school in Boston and in the 80s. And those clubs were big, and we had our graduation parties here and things like that. But I thought by like the 90s or even by 2000, you had Puffer Bellies open really late, but it was, you know.
Yeah, it was something that Puffer Bellies, Mill Hill, like when they closed, it was a period of decline. It wasn't like they were at their peak and, oh no, they had to close. It was more, yeah, it's time. Like that thing with Mill Hill being open for a few years where it was boarded up, but they would like turn the sign on and no one would ever go because it was open for an hour for a technicality. I think it was a different tax rate. It was something like that.
You could have probably done a little ad in Cape Cod Times. Remember, we didn't have no digital cameras. We all have our photo albums of all those pictures from Puffer Bellies and the Millville clubs. But it's interesting that it was hard getting old pictures.
It really was. That Kings of Cape Cod, they helped me out a lot. So I recommend.
Where can we find that? Where would we find that documentary?
So if you go to their Facebook page, Kings of Cape Cod, I know they've got a link there. And that's just something I think it came out almost 10 years ago. But all of those big names are in it. And that's where they have a page that people contributed their photos to. So that's how I found a lot, because I asked a lot, and it was more, oh, my memories are hazy. We were too busy drinking and having fun to take pictures. And I was like, I understand that. It didn't help me with the book, but and then I did the hotels and motels book and the restaurants book before and after, tons of photos of both. This became the most fun one to write, but the one that I didn't have as many visual aids as I wanted. But yes, thank you so much for coming. I've got books there. I've got cards. I've got postcards. So be my guest. And hopefully I'll be back here next year. I think Amy was saying that she wants me to come back and talk about my restaurants book. Thank you to everybody listening on Zoom and later on the YouTube channel.